Hello and welcome to DSR's Words Matter. I'm David Rothkopf and I'm joined this week, as every week, by Norm Ornstein. How are you, Norm?
I'm
Come
about the
on,
same as
better. It's
usual.
got to be.
Actually, I'm a little bit better because of the quite remarkable election results. Certainly. I'm
Yeah,
also
well,
a little bit better because we have two other quite remarkable developments. One, the sandwich guy was acquitted, found not guilty, uh, after you had a Homeland Security thug testify that the sandwich that he threw at him exploded all over his bulletproof vest and he could smell the mustard and onions. And somehow that
no.
didn't convince the jury that it was assault. And the other is uh, one of their main ICE thugs a judge who said that he never assaulted a bystander, despite video clearly showing him taking on an innocent person just standing there and throwing him to the ground. And the judge just said he lied. So we're starting to see some pushback, at least a little, to the thuggery, the American
Well,
Gestapo, as we call
this
it.
is this is this is great, Norm. Everything's better. We don't have it.
Uh,
I mean, what are we going to talk about?
um,
America's fine.
yeah,
Did you see
yeah,
Donald Trump today when the guy collapsed in the office behind
yeah,
him?
yeah. I
And
mean, the
and Trump
empathy, oozing empathy.
It was for those of you who have not seen it. I first of all, I can't believe it. If you open social media, any social media, it's there because there's a picture of Trump. Like this guy just collapsed next to him, and there are people attending to him, and Trump is just staring out into space. Just doesn't have any impulse to intervene to help the guy or to do anything. And
Well,
it's
you
such
know
a
what
like
he's
a
thinking. You know what he's thinking. He's thinking he better not mess up that carpet. I just put it in.
Well, I worry about the guy because if you lie too long on the floor there, you get gilded by, some guy comes
Right.
in and sprays you.
Like Goldfinger. Yes.
Exactly. You get sprayed with gold paint.
Yeah.
All right. Let's be serious.
Yes.
There was an election. Everybody who listens to this podcast, they're like looking at their watches all day till today, going, I gotta hear Norm about this. First of all, he complains constantly. Maybe this has lifted his spirits, but we want to know: does this mean everything's fine and the Democrats are going to win big next year, and Trump will then be investigated by the House forever, and nothing bad will happen, and um, you know, but all's right with the world?
So first, let me give the plus side. This was a sweeping across the board victory for Democrats. Virginia, the most remarkable, where Democrats have more than 60 seats in the state house for the first time in decades, electing the governor by a landslide margin, electing the lieutenant governor and the embattled, for good reason, candidate for attorney general. Um, we see it in New Jersey. We see it with three retention elections for Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania. We see it in the California referendum. We see it in New Jersey, which turned out not to be close at all either. And what we know from some of the preliminary analysis is it wasn't just a robust turnout by Democrats, it was many Trump voters going in the other direction. And that indicates that all of the bloviating that Trump and his acolytes do about how this is the best economy ever and everything is going great and what a record for his first almost year, that the American people don't buy it in any way. Now, the downside, David, that while this
Come
is
on. There's always a downside. Couldn't
that's my job here because you are
Yeah,
the eternal optimist, and I have to
yeah.
bring you back to reality a
Uh,
little bit.
don't yuck my yum. Go on. All right.
But,
Okay.
but
What's the
well,
downside?
one more big upside, which is this, I believe, has got to affect the dynamics surrounding the shutdown and relief for what is probably 30 million people, not just the ones who have been on Affordable Care Act exchanges, but during the open enrollment period, those who want to join the exchanges and who've gotten notices that if they don't extend the subsidies, premiums are going to be out of reach for 30 million people. And I think we're getting close to some resolution of this. And that resolution, however it comes out, even if, for example, Republicans in the Senate go along with Trump's demand and they eliminate the filibuster and jam through their spending plan, excuse me, which would mean no subsidy relief, it's very clear that the blame now goes directly to Republicans. And we can come back to this, but I will say that if Democrats had not stood firm, if they had capitulated early on, as some of their members, John Fetterman, Angus King, wanted them to do, then the whole idea of who was responsible for this would have been muddied. So that's good. And I think it's accelerated by the fact that Republicans now know that they're on the defensive. Now, the downside. The downside is that this will cause Trump and his fellow Republicans to double down on voter suppression, on trying to take away the right of large numbers of Americans to vote. And looming before us is, of course, a Supreme Court decision that will probably, by taking away effectively what remains of the Voting Rights Act, despite John Roberts' pledge when he did the Shelby County decision that there will always be Section 2, not to get into the technicalities, but that could mean 8 or 10 additional House seats that are now held by people of color going over to Republicans, making the battle to win the House a little bit more uphill. It's still, however, more likely than not, even with the headwinds that these awful people, including election deniers now in prime positions at Homeland Security and the Justice Department, still more likely than not that Democrats take the House. And that is what we need to save the Republic and save our democracy.
I want to go back to this, but I just want to take a moment because I'd like you to put it in some perspective. Because you mentioned the House, Nancy Pelosi announced today she's not running again, and it's worth stopping because I think in our lifetime she's one of a handful of the most consequential political figures, and I'm just wondering as we sort of go into that election, what her legacy is.
I was just actually going on social media about this. I believe I've known Nancy Pelosi since she first came to the House. And I think simply she is the best speaker in the history of the country. She is the most consequential and obviously the first woman to hold that office. But she is tough as nails, savvy as could be, led her caucus, even when there was some controversy, in the right direction, stood up to Trump in a way that almost nobody else did in that first term. But I also want to add, David, that she's a quite remarkable person. I'm not sure if I've ever said this before on Words Matter, but for as many know, I lost my son, Matthew, almost 11 years ago, January 3rd, 2015. January 6th, we had his funeral and then gathered at our house for a Shiva. And Nancy heard about it from a colleague who happened to be in her office when a dear friend of ours and hers called and told her the news. And Pelosi, this is January 6th. The House is just back in session. They were there. She came to our house and stayed for 3 hours. For people at that level, their most precious commodity is their time. She could have sent flowers. She could have, sent a little note. She could have come for 10 minutes and left. It takes a remarkable person to be in that position and do what she did. And so I will always adore Nancy Pelosi. And I will be sad when she leaves. there's another element of this legacy. And just to take this to another level, in 10 days or so, I'm going to be joining Jim Clyburn, who was the majority whip, the Democratic whip for much of the time that Pelosi was Speaker and Democratic leader, to interview him about a new book that he's done called The First Eight, which is about the first 8 African Americans who served in Congress and the top positions in the state legislature in South Carolina. All of them, of course, in the aftermath of the Civil War before Reconstruction destroyed all of that. Jim Clyburn, now way up into his 80s, the top 3 leaders of the Democratic Party for a long time in the House, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, all in their 80s. And instead of clinging to office even longer, they all decided peacefully, voluntarily, to give up those leadership positions while they stayed in Congress for a younger generation to move forward without the bloodletting that would typically and normally happen. That was Nancy Pelosi's doing. She made that transition a smooth one. And whatever you think of the leadership that's there now, it was I would say, a selfless act when it would have been easy to try to cling to power because you have more authority. But it's also that she didn't say, okay, that's it. I'm not going to be speaker. I'm not going to be leader. Why stick around? I'm leaving. She stuck around not to challenge Hakeem Jeffries or undermine Hakeem Jeffries, but to quietly and behind the scenes use her savvy, her expertise, her understanding of the rules, the process, and the other members to help him. So she's just one of a kind, I would say, and will really be missed.
Yeah, totally agree on all of those points. I've met her many times, spent time with her. Your personal story resonates because one of the things that came through clearest to me is she valued family, even with this remarkable career, her own family, her own grandkids. But she also had this remarkable facility as a political leader, which she got from her father, who I think was mayor of Baltimore. Her brother
Tom
was mayor of
D'Alessandro.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I was in multiple events where she was in a room with 100 people or 25 people. And she would go around and she knew something about all of them. And she knew the legislation inside out. And, sometimes, there are people on the Hill who play a big role. People become president who are not that bright. She was brilliant in a lot of respects, and I think she deserves credit for that as well.
I know some of her family. I know her husband, Paul, who still struggles after that horrific attack on him. And I should note that the number of major Republican figures who made fun of the fact that he was brutally attacked, who tried to attribute slimy and disgusting motives to it, who are now going on self-righteously about Charlie Kirk. Awful. And Paul is a great human being. I know her daughter, Christine, just a terrific, talented woman. Nancy, as we know, brought up 5 children before she went into politics and then just rose dramatically to the top of the ladder. And there aren't very many people who could say that, deferring their careers while they take care of their children and then stepping in when it's time and doing what she did. Really quite something.
Yeah, totally agree, and a very very consequential um, political leader. One of the people who said shitty things about the attack on Paul Pelosi was Glenn Youngkin. Um,
Yeah.
his legacy is um, com- essentially complete failure in Virginia, and Spanberger won by what 16%. That you had this big takeover of the House of Delegates there, could have consequences for gerrymandering, could have consequences for the party leadership. First woman to run Virginia in 400 plus years. Maybe we should just spend a moment, talk about her, talk about Mikey Sherrill, and talk about Zohran Mamdani.
So, we have this, one of the most significant, I think, political developments, certainly for the Democratic Party in recent years, is the rise of women with military or intelligence or foreign policy experience. And that's Abigail Spanberger in intelligence. It's Mikey Sherrill. Of course, we have a number of others who are veterans. We have Alyssa
Alyssa
Slotkin,
Slotkin, yeah,
who's an
exactly.
emerging superstar. If I were to pick anybody who I think is likely to be a running mate, whoever the Democrats nominate, if we have an election in 2028, I'd put Alyssa Slotkin at the top of the list. Not only somebody with experience abroad, but somebody who can speak directly to voters, to working class voters. Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger are two wonderfully attractive, smart, and experienced leaders. And I think they're going to be just terrific in these roles. And that Spanberger won significantly, I don't think was much of a surprise. We weren't sure at all what would happen in New Jersey, which has become less blue, more competitive. Jack, the Republican candidate, came within 3 points of beating Phil Murphy the last time. And, there were a lot of concerns about that race, and Mikey won handily.
13 points
Mamdani,
now.
13 points. Mamdani appears to have gotten over 50%, despite a huge sum of money put in against him by a bunch of billionaires who don't like him. There's no question that he is a generational talent. If anybody who's watched him speak, anybody who looked at his ads, they're just remarkable. And it's also important to remember that there's one word that explains his rise more than any other, and that's affordability. He hit on what matters most to New York voters, and you can understand why. Let's say you're making $20 an hour in New York, minimum wage being $7, 20 being something that is, seems on the surface to be quite a lot. You can't afford to live in Manhattan. You can't afford to live in Brooklyn. Increasingly, it's unlikely that you could afford to live in Queens. It is impossible to get by. And as we know, when he's had this proposal, which has been distorted some, there are areas of Manhattan that are absolute food deserts. There are no grocery stores or supermarkets, little bodegas that are extremely expensive. He wants to try an experiment to have 5 city-run grocery stores in these areas because the chains will not go in. We don't know if it'll work, but he hit on what matters to voters. And all the other stuff, certainly it's true that some of the things that he said about October 7th and about Hamas are deeply troubling, but he managed to achieve significant support among Jewish voters, I think for 2 reasons. One is they resonate to his larger views. And despite the fact that he is a socialist, quote unquote, which is not a dirty word, and we hear all these people saying socialism doesn't work. Apparently, people who have never been to Sweden or Denmark or Norway, which is not the same as what they are defining as socialism, but in fact, it is a larger welfare state paid for with higher taxes, more on the wealthy, but providing the basic services that everybody needs to live. And if he can come through with any of that, understanding that it's an impossible job as mayor of New York, understanding that he can't do exactly what he wants, and that there will be limits. He can't impose taxes himself. He's going to need a city council to be able to do that. He may need some cooperation from the governor. But this talk by some of these billionaires, the Bill Ackmans of the world, that they're going to leave and there will be a mass exodus. I mean, my reaction, first of all, is go ahead. You want to leave, and all of you want to leave, sell your $25 million apartments and see how much you can get. And frankly, if a lot of them leave, it just makes housing more affordable in New York, which satisfies what Mamdani wants. But that's a bluff. And the question is going to be whether he can try to pursue his goals and yet be pragmatic enough to reach out to a larger group of voters and not get caught up in some of these controversies that have little to do with the main element of his campaign, affordability. And, at the same time, I'd add one other thing, which is I see that the fire chief in New York immediately resigned. And my reaction to that first was one word, coward. Second, if you, instead of doing what you have pledged to do to protect New Yorkers, decide that because you don't like the politics of the mayor, you're going to resign, good riddance, leave the city, and we don't need that anymore. But clearly, Mamdani is going to have to build relationships with the police and the fire department. The first real test is whether he keeps Tisch as a police commissioner, somebody who's clearly just done a terrific job trying to keep the worst elements of the NYPD from taking over, but also making sure that public safety is the top priority. That's really critical for him.
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable story, and I encourage everybody to dig deeper into it because it's been miscast by a lot of people. Donald Trump today said he's all about affordability, which suggests that he is now like, oh, whatever the Zohran, we got to get with this stuff. This is a point in the program where we say to the folks who are listening for free out there, we're really glad you could join us, and we hope that you want to keep listening, and that means becoming a member. It's a couple bucks a month or a few bucks a month, and you just go to the DSR network and click on membership. And if you're able to do that, we'd appreciate the support, and then you'll be able to listen to the rest of the podcast. For now, thanks very much. And if you're a member, stand by for more about the election.